Hello and welcome to the Watermark Water Cooler. We're here with Cara, and she's going to talk to us about, is your brand scalable and why consistency matters. Cara, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. So my name is Cara. I'm a designer. I've been with Watermark for about 8 months now, and I've just recently moved to Colorado, loving the mountain views, coming from Kankakee, Illinois. So it's quite the change up. But
Kankakee, I always fib Cara about Kankakee because I always think it's like a Hawaiian island, but it's not.
yeah, it's
Where's Kankakee?
quite the opposite. So it's south suburb area of Chicagoland, more concrete than island, but we do have a nice river. So there's that.
It sounds so luscious.
I'll take it.
Awesome. So, this is a big kind of thing that design people have to consider is there's a bunch of different platforms where your brand shows up. There's web, print, social, all these channels, video that your brand has to show up. And some of that consistency conversation is a big thing that should be considered. What are some of these things that people should be considering when they're designing for a brand that's going to work across these channels?
Sure. Yeah. So I think when we look at the most successful brands and companies, we can think about instantly how they're recognizable. And I'll talk about this a lot of brand recognition and brand consistency. So when we think about designing for multiple channels, be it print or digital or video and even social media, at the heart of that needs to be consistency. And a lot of that starts with just building your brand guidelines that are going to allow viewers to recognize your brand.
Each of them have their own kind of nuances. And I know that I've seen it just here recently with some of our projects that we're working on. And as the brand is starting to be developed, you put it on another platform and it maybe doesn't work as well. Like you've got a video come up and you've got your logo on the video stream and you're like, yeah, it doesn't really look the same as it did on a print piece. We've had a lot of conversation recently about like print color and screen color and how they're so different, and clients being like worried about that. So there's a lot to consider when you're looking at these platforms and starting to build brand standards.
Absolutely. So I think when we start any project, and even if we're doing a logo pack for a client, it's really good to have multiple versions of logos that might be scalable at different sizes. And you mentioned, again, colors looking different on screen versus print. When we make a palette with consideration to print, we're designing in CMYK color format, and in digital, that's in RGB. And so those colors will sometimes look different in translation. It's not always a one-to-one. So it's important, again, establishing early, how is my logo going to be presented in this format? How does it change in this format? But how do I make it as consistent as possible, even within those changes that I need to consider for? Some other considerations to take into account is, what are the standards that you're operating with? For a print piece, your type sizes are going to run smaller. They can be, as small as 8-point font, but on digital, you don't really want to go smaller than 14 to 16 points. And so if you're not intentionally setting those typographic standards, it can be difficult for your users to interact with those pieces. And so understanding how that could even change something as seemingly minuscule as a type size can really make or break your brand and how successful your pieces are out in the world.
Yeah, it just goes to kind of tell you how important a brand standards guide really is, and a thorough one, not just whenever we do a logo, we kind of force people to take a basic brand standards guide because we just think it's so important that you have at least the basics of how to use the logo taken care of, but it goes so much beyond that. And this is a great chance for you to have that brand standards guide that actually talks about all these different mediums, and channels
Absolutely.
and platforms or whatever it may be that you're going to put your brand on. There's so many different applications that your brand, maybe it's your packaging, whatever it may be, that your brand could how it represents your business.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think too, even at the core of that could be, what's my brand personality? Am I defining my key demographic? Am I, channeling the messaging that I have to them, and, understanding what's the personality, what's the mood, maybe establishing a voice that you use in your marketing or on these different collaterals. So I think, yeah, at the core of it, it's even just beyond visual. It's how do I consistently define my brand? And then from there, it makes it easier to kind of hone in on a micro level to these different specifications.
Yeah. Your brand is, I think, one of the things that as companies start to emerge is one of the things that they kind of devalue. And I think it's really important to setting the stage of like how your company's run. Like Cara saying, like what's your voice, what's your style? If you're a really playful company and your stuff comes off as like stodgy, it was like because you don't have a good brand standards explaining that, uh, that may not reach your demographic well. So like spending the time to really figure that out is so important.
Yeah, but if you think about as well, maybe the designer or the team of designers that initially established a brand might not always have their hands on it. And so another good reason to have brand guidelines or visual guidelines is future proofing it for any other designer that could be operating with that. Sometimes there's instances when you're outsourcing different projects, working with different agencies, and so making things as defined as possible, kind of really just ensures that your brand is going to be as successful as possible.
Another thing that we started doing is, Carrie, you're gonna have to remind me what these are called because this is so new. We're just starting to do it. Is in web, we're starting to make basically a little brand standards guide of its own for the website. What are they? What are we calling them?
We use the phrase UI style tile as sort of like a
Style
high
tile. Yeah.
level view. And it really does just establish the colors that you're working with, the type sizes, so your header tags, your H1, your H2, and so forth. And then any other sort of visual consistencies. Maybe that's different states that your buttons are in, or maybe it's different layouts for different pages. But it really does make or break a site if it's consistent for a user, if they begin to
Yeah.
understand patterns, and it promotes better interactivity and ease of use.
Yeah, and it helps the dev team. I think that's another thing. Like as they're
Absolutely.
building the development team, as they're building the site to make a consistent site for you, because there's gonna be times when your UX UI team didn't do something. There's always some little thing that is like, oh yeah, we forgot this extra page
Absolutely.
that nobody knew about or button that
Yeah.
nobody knew about. So how does the dev team, are they going to continue to go back to the design team and say like, hey, we need a button? I was like, no, like we have a style guide, style tile, sorry, that defines that for them. So
Yes.
you
Yeah,
know,
it makes workflows faster. It really just, and communicating with your dev team earlier on is just better for everyone in the long run. Developers have a lot of insight on, we talk about scalability or responsive web design, and, how does this look on a mobile view versus on desktop? Users will be seeing this work in different ways. And so, yeah, having that intention and really just setting the groundwork. Sometimes it feels tedious in the beginning and we just want to dive into the fun designing part, but it really does make a difference when you take the time to just get that framework established.
yeah, I have to give props to our design team because they have done some really nitty gritty stuff where it's like Cara said, I think sometimes it always like looks glamorous, the design, like it's not always all glamour. There's some like, in the trenches work. If you do that stuff well, your project's going to turn out a lot better. So we work really hard to do those things, and continue to evolve that process.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Cara, I think we've covered a lot of stuff here. We don't want to make this video too long. We want to keep all of our audience engaged.
Totally.
So thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you want to leave the audience to remember about these graphic standards across these multiple platforms?
Yeah, I would say it's easier for a company starting out or a brand starting out to kind of establish all of that in the beginning. But if for you, maybe you haven't had that consistency be part of your just sort of workflow, it's never too late to just go back and say, how do things look? What's the direction we want to move our brand in? And then just going back and setting those standards. So, we always encourage that becomes part of your journey at some point. The sooner the better, obviously. But yeah, we can't stress enough how important that is in the long run and how, yeah.
Thanks so much, Cara, for your time today. As always, if you have any feedback to what we just talked about, if you want to add to the conversation, we'd love to know about your challenges, your pain points that you're having with your brand standards. We'll get back to you if you comment on the channel. As always, follow us, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you, and we will see you next month.